Hey guys, it's Shaheer again. This is part 3 of our cramming series that we're doing leading up to the ACT exam. So if you haven't watched the first 2 parts, I recommend you watch the How to Cram in 2 weeks and How to Cram in 1 week video, where I kind of build a study plan week to week and now day to day for how to cram for the ACT exam. Feel free to check those out before. We'll link them somewhere below, above, etc. But yep, today we're going to continue the study plan and kind of check in and also adjust depending on, what might have worked or what might not have worked over these last few days to 2 weeks that you've been studying, hopefully. And if you haven't been studying yet, it's totally fine. This video will still be very, very useful for helping you cram, quote unquote, in these last few days and get as much out of that time that you have left as possible. I'm going to keep this short and simple, short and sweet. So let's get started. We're going to just, like I said, build on what we discussed in the last 2 videos. So first thing, you should have already started doing a little bit of practice. And if you did some and you found that things are starting to work, things are starting to look on the up, you've made some improvements, you've started learning some skills, that's great. Keep doing that. But I recommend now what you do is you just focus in on those weak sections. There might be 1 or 2 sections where you're just having a lot of trouble. Things are taking a lot of time to pick up and learn. That's natural. Everyone goes through it. Maybe you feel like that about all the sections. That's fine as well. That means things might not be going as well. But I recommend that you pick your 2 sections that are the weakest and spend like the last 80% of the effort that you put in on those 2 sections. So for me, that would be reading and science. So if I'm taking another 3 or 4 practice exams over this last, or really let's say if I'm doing 2 more practice exams per day over these last 4 days, I'm going to say 1 reading, 1 science. So let's get started. So tip number 1, we obviously recommended that you start doing some practice exams, when this 2-week cramming period began. So hopefully by now you've got some practice exams under your belt. If you've ideally started making some progress on those exams, seeing some scores increase, fluctuate a little, and overall increase, that's great. That's what we want to see. What I recommend, if that's the situation that you're in, keep practicing. Obviously, don't take the foot off the gas, but focus in on 2 sections that you feel are your weakest. So for me, that would be reading and science. What I would do is the last 4 days, I would take 2 sections a day, and they would be those 2 sections that I'm the weakest in. You don't want to just forget about the others, but for the remaining practice exams, the vast majority of them should be your 2 weakest sections. And if you feel like all of your sections are your weakest sections, then you can keep mixing it up. But if you've identified 2 as your weakest ones, which all happens to a lot of students, and practice those for the last 4 days repetitively, only those. Maybe throw in, one of the others as well if you want, but the main issues are going to be those 2 because those are going to bring your score down. So take it for what it's worth. If you feel like things haven't been going as well, like I said, just keep practicing a little bit of everything. And if you haven't started work at all yet, then you also need to just practice a little bit of everything. So depending on which bucket you kind of find yourself in, take the direction based on that. Now another thing, this is tip number 2. If you haven't started doing any work yet for cramming, and if this video is like the first video that you're seeing in this series and you're just getting started with studying, totally fine. A lot of students are in that situation, and we still want to make sure you make progress. But what you're gonna have to do is gonna obviously be a little bit more just intense overall than someone who has been studying for a few weeks, few months, etc. So I generally recommend that you do 2 sections a day, but for someone that's in your situation, if you haven't really started studying yet, you might need to do 2 to 4 sections a day and really, really put in a lot of time into this if you want to see results. And you have to make sure that you're not just doing the practice, but you're spending almost as much time reviewing your mistakes as you are taking the actual test. So if you take a 3-hour test, you might have to spend 3 hours going through each mistake, reviewing why you got it wrong, taking notes on it, like I recommended in the last video. I give you 4 main questions to think through for every single problem that you got wrong, and to go through that exercise for every past exam that you've done over and over again. For more on that, you should check out the past video. I might be discussing those methods here as well. I'm forgetting what my list is, but the point is you need to make sure that you're putting a lot of time into practice. So it's going to be a little bit more work if you haven't started studying yet. So that's another thing that you might have to deal with. Again, it just depends on how much you want to accomplish in this last few days. That's what I would recommend for someone in your situation. Now, tip number 2. So let's say you're someone who hasn't really started studying yet. Maybe this is the first video that you're seeing from us in this 2-week cramming video series. If that's the situation that you're in, then you're going to have to do a little bit more work than someone that has been practicing for a few weeks, few months, etc. For you, I would recommend that you don't just do 2 sections a day, which is what I would recommend for anyone kind of in this situation that has been studying. But if you haven't been studying, I'd recommend 2 to 4. I generally don't like recommending a lot of work leading up to the exam, but if you want to make sure that you see results out of the test and out of these last few days, you're gonna have to put in, like I said, just a little bit more work to catch up, right? You need to build repetitions, build reps so that your brain gets used to the skills, the strategies, the way the test is kind of structured, so that you can kind of learn the skills and get used to those repetitive question types. If you just don't have repetitions, it's going to be very hard for you to be good at those. So 2 to 4 tests per day practice sections, right? Not 2 to 4 full tests, but essentially if you want to think of it as full test, it'd be half a test to a full test every day for the next 4 days. Again, that'll just help you get repetitions. And that brings me to tip number 3, which is if you feel like 2 to 4 tests per day is too much work, then that's fine. Don't do that much work. I don't want you to burn out. And that's generally why I recommend that students just stick to 2. But if you really, really want to push, you can do 3, maybe even 4 for the next few days. See how things go. If you feel like you're starting to burn out and if it's just too much, you're not picking things up, then you can ramp it down, and that might actually help you pick things up a little more. But at the very least, do 2 tests per day. You need to have practice volume for your test. And also make sure that when you review your tests, you review each mistake individually. You ask yourself those key questions such as, why did I get this question wrong? What's the correct answer? Why is it correct? How can I take something away from this problem so that next time I see this question type, I don't make the same mistake again? Those are the key questions you need to be asking yourself. And I'd highly recommend that you document those in a journal for every single problem that you have got incorrect on all of your past practicing. I also recommend that you review every single problem from your past practice exams after you take each practice exam. So let's say you just took your 4th practice test. You should go ahead and after that 4th test, review all of your past problems in addition to the problems from your 4th test, because problem types on the ACT exam repeat from exam to exam, and the more you review your mistakes, the more you'll essentially bridge the gap between your score and your target score, because those mistakes are what are kind of keeping you from where you want to be, right? You need to learn those mistakes, understand them, and get those question types right. That's basically strategy number 4, which is continue that mistake log, continue writing it down, journaling it. You don't have to journal it, but I highly recommend you do. It'll just help you retain everything a lot better if you write it down yourself. Strategy number 5. Now, this relates to the whole reading and science strategies that we're talking about, right? Timing, skimming methods. On science, looking for variables, relationships, differences. On reading, looking for relationships, emotions, events. So related to all of that, you should now be at a point in your study plan where you feel like you've already picked a method as far as skimming, reading, timing that you like, and you've started to practice it repetitively, and you've gotten some repetitions with that same method and hopefully seen some improvement. You might not see any improvement yet because it's still very early in the process. If you've been doing one skimming method for just 5 to 10 days, it's going to take a lot of practice. So if it feels really weird right now, if you haven't really got the method fully down yet, that's understandable. If that's the case for you, you essentially review those videos again that go over skimming methods, timing methods for reading and science. We'll link them in a card or down below, and you review those just to get an idea of what the methods look like and how you do them. And hopefully that review will help you perform a little better on your next practice exam. But it's going to still take a lot of work. So these next few days, make sure you really focus in and hone in on doing those reading and science sections if you feel like they're weak for you, and getting that practice in, because these next few days are where you're really going to perfect that skimming or reading method or that timing method, whatever strategy it is. Now, strategy number 5 relates to those reading and science, skimming and timing methods, just those strategies in general, right? Those non-skill related strategies. So with this, you should ideally now be at a point, if you followed the advice from the last 2 videos, you should now be at a point where you've experimented with the methods, the different methods of reading and skimming and timing. You've picked 1 or 2 ideally just one that you really like, and now you've started just practicing it as of the last video. So if you're at a point where you're now practicing it repetitively, you should start to see some results with just getting a little more used to it, getting a little better at it over these next few days. It might feel a little unnatural right now, and that's totally understandable, but over these next few days, you should start to see that improvement. So start looking out for that. Start putting more attention towards practicing and executing, not just trying to learn from mistakes, but executing on those reading and science strategy related kind of improvements that we're doing here. If you feel like it's working, if you feel like the strategies are starting to make sense, that's great. Keep at it. Don't take your foot off the gas, because the moment you do that, you never know, the improvement might go away. Like, it's been a very short amount of time. 1 to 2 weeks is a very short amount of time. You want to make sure that you capture some consistency with your score before your test day, because it's very possible that you might score something twice and then the 3rd or 4th time your score just drops. That happens to students. Focus on getting consistency and never take your foot off the gas. The only case where I might recommend doing that, stop doing reading and science practice, is if you feel like English and math are just really that weak. But typically reading and science are a little easier to improve anyway. So if you want to get some easy points these last few days and you've already done some reading and science practice to the extent that I told you about, then might as well just keep practicing it. That's your call to make. There isn't really a wrong way of going about it here. Just think about where you can easily get points. Generally, it'll come from lower sections, but also reading and science are easier sections to improve. I would just do reading and science. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that for this video. Hopefully this was helpful. We'll have one more video in this series where I talk about how to cram in one day. And yes, it is entirely possible to cram and improve in just one day. So we'll see you in that next video. If you have any more questions, you want to follow up, discuss one-on-one any of the topics that we discussed in this video, you can click the links down below. We have access to our website for free tutoring resources, more free practice exams, and a lot of other stuff that you can check out too. So hopefully this was helpful. Talk to you soon. Bye. Really what it just boils down to is you need to practice. Just practice.